J'ai l'honneur aussi de présenter le prochain présentateur, le docteur Ben Zweibelson. Ben Zweibelson est directeur du programme de design et innovation de l'Université des forces d'opération spéciales interarmées des États-Unis. Et c'est une université qui fait partie du commandement des forces spéciales des américaines. Ben, en fait, ce qui est fantastique, c'est qu'il a aussi eu la même formation que Mathieu à la School of Advanced Military Studies il y a 10 ans de cela. Et il a pu tout de suite appliquer le design durant ses tours de combat en Afghanistan et en Irak. Et au niveau de notre réseau, Ben, c'est le plus grand contributeur, tant au niveau théorique que pratique dans le design. Donc, c'est vraiment l'autorité. Vous pouvez juste entrer son nom ou le regarder sur notre site web. Il a au-dessus de 50 publications dans des journaux à la fois scientifiques, mais aussi professionnels militaires. Et en ce moment, je dirais que pour la plupart des cours de design au sein des pays de l'OTAN, Ben s'y retrouve ou au moins un membre de son équipe. Donc c'est vraiment une force de la nature qui pousse ce mouvement-là à travers les forces armées de l'OTAN et de ses partenaires. Aujourd'hui, c'est un moment un peu spécial pour Ben, parce que Ben, en fait, a rêvé depuis toujours de présenter à l'école de guerre. Donc, c'est un grand moment historique pour lui, j'espère pour vous aussi. Et aussi, Ben est très inspiré par la philosophie et la culture française. Je vous donne un indice, il ne s'agit pas de Jomini ou de Descartes. Mais plutôt des penseurs qui logeaient au Collège de France. Alors, Ben, aujourd'hui, va vous présenter une introduction au design stratégique. Et Ben est un pratiquant, si on veut, d'une approche design intégrale et à la fois dans sa façon de présenter. Donc, il ne présente jamais la même chose. Donc, ce sera la première fois qu'il présente cette introduction aujourd'hui. Alors voilà, c'est un plaisir pour moi de l'introduire. Ben, you can switch on. It's your turn.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to thank Echo de Guerre for inviting us here on behalf of Dr. Ike Wilson, the JSAL president, as well as our design team and the JSAL educators and faculty, where we provide the special operations forces and international forces around the world with lots of different education. But in my case, it's design. And today I'll be talking with you about strategic design, what it means, how JSAL provides the education, and some theory to help challenge you and stimulate you. So my slides are available, and we'll make sure that if you need a copy on PDF or my slide notes that I'll be reading from today, they will definitely be available. However, they will be in English and not in French. Let me go to share screen. And hopefully everyone now sees the slides, and I will switch to presenter view. Okay, so where we're going to start today with my presentation is to start with this image of the Ming Dynasty with an emperor here to talk about military design and how it works in a complex security context. So back in this time period, well, actually, it's a fictional story, and it's about the Celestial Emporium of Benevolent Knowledge. And this was a taxonomy or a list of all different animals that the emperor said, my world must follow. Everyone must follow this. And you can see some of these categories up here, and they're very strange, such as animals who have just broken a vase. That gets its own category. Or animals that belong to the emperor. And my personal favorite, animals that from far away look like flies, which really means every animal. This is almost a ridiculous or a shocking sort of a way of making sense of all creatures. And the reason I'm showing you this is because the other week I was working with European strategists and showing them design. And one of the strategists asked me the question that you see at the top of the slide here. Where should we position design? Does it work better at the strategic level, or maybe the operational, or do you think maybe tactical? So in order to answer that question, I introduced this construct first, and I'm showing it to you now. Hold on, click. There we go. And so this story was originally written by a fictional author, Bourget, an Argentinian. And what he was arguing here was he was providing an example of something controversial with the taxonomy. And he was arguing that the quote there is, "There's no description of the universe that isn't arbitrary and conjectural for a simple reason. We don't know what the universe is." And so what he's suggesting there is that this construct that really doesn't make any sense to us, this was used, or arguably was used in a story for an entire society for many generations. And that's how they had to categorize. So this gets us into philosophy. So what we're talking about here is when we ask about design, we're asking some philosophical questions. So Michel Foucault put this story at the beginning of one of his books, The Order of Things. And the reason he did this is he was challenging how we as human beings construct and organize knowledge. And I'm using it here today because what we do in design at a certain level is we challenge the military frame for making sense of war and warfare. And that is really what can happen here. The question that the strategist asked me the other week: should we position design at the strategic or the operational or tactical level? Where does it work best? This immediately assumes that we can critique the value of design, but we are never going to question something such as the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of war. And that's very interesting for me as a designer, because I want to challenge that right now with you. If you were thinking at the beginning, well, this is a pretty valid question. I would like to know where design does fit. Does it fit at the strategic level? Should we use it only there or mostly there? If you move into this direction, what we are really doing first is we are unaware of our military frame that is automatically advocating that we operate and organize warfare at a strategic, operational, and tactical level of war. And so this is the first area that we as designers might challenge. So what I want you to do is just consider, where did the levels of war come from? Why are there not 5 levels of war? There used to be 2 plus grand strategy kind of as an icing on the cake. And then in the 1980s, the United States military formally added the operational level of war. And many military historians will argue that that really fomented in the world wars, in World War I and II, with certain militaries really trying this theory out. But what about before that? We've had recorded conflict for over 40 centuries, and it has not always been this way. Is this also arbitrary, like the emperor's list of things? So what we did previously with the European strategists is our design team introduced the Mobius strip that you see on the right-hand side, just as an example of challenging where levels of war are valid or not, where that frame comes from. And this is just an example. I am not saying that levels of war is wrong or that we need to get rid of it. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that if you think about this, and if you consider how levels of war work, they operate in a classical mechanics logic. And this comes from the last 3 centuries and the modernization of our militaries, drawing from largely natural science. And this actually makes sense. It's how we like to make sense of warfare. The Mobius strip is something that challenges and breaks this up. And so if you're not familiar with this, it's a mathematical construct. It was developed in the mid-19th century. So this wasn't even a thing, did not exist when we were developing levels of war in Sweden and in France and in Prussia in the 17th and 18th centuries, were the first military academies and the first military doctrine that's modern developed. And the Mobius strip is the most simplest non-orientable surface in 3D space, which means if you're in the Mobius strip, you cannot tell if you're moving to the right or to the left, counterclockwise or clockwise. It doesn't make sense. And this is important because what if you were to try to use how we construct war, strategic, operational, tactical, not in layers, but in something like a Mobius strip? I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm just asking the question as a way of disrupting our frame that otherwise is unchallenged. And so what I'm presenting here is a way of designing why we do what we do with warfare, because what we are currently at the crossroads today and why military design exists since the 1990s is because militaries are struggling with a changing world that is growing increasingly more complex. And war today has the potential of being different than where it was for the last several centuries and even further back. So what I'd like to start with here is the orange circle that talks about classical mechanics of warfare. And this is much more familiar to all of you because this is what composes all of our language about war. It's espouses through our doctrine, through many of our methodologies for decision making. This is analytic. It's systematic. It's looking for inputs and outputs, ends, ways, and means. There's a Newtonian, Sir Isaac Newton, there's a Newtonian orientation, and this drives from physics and natural sciences into the emerging fields of engineering, artillery, logistics, all the things that we needed in the last several centuries because war was changing with the technology, with the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, what Napoleon did, and then later what Scharnhorst and Clausewitz and Jomini and all these great thinkers brought this in, but they used this language exclusively. Now, in the lower left is quantum. And I introduce this because this isn't a lecture on quantum theory, but I do want to touch upon, we are entering the second quantum revolution right now. And this ties into warfare. The first quantum revolution occurred between the 1920s and the 1940s. You all are familiar with the atomic bomb, with radar, with early computers or proto-computers that could do cryptology, the Enigma machine. And then later, after World War II, the arrival of lasers. So all those are quantum. And in the second revolution, you have a list here of all the things that are now becoming potential warfare tools with quantum that is different. And quantum cannot be explained using classical mechanics language, metaphors, or constructs. And so if we use those in war and demand that quantum be explained in that same language, we are going to run into significant challenges. There's also a social construction of warfare in the lower right, and this draws from social paradigm theory. I'm going to get into that shortly, as well as postmodernism and complexity theory, organizational theory. And these are the things that today, with computers and the internet and social media, knowledge can be changed, distorted, influenced in ways that don't tie into objective analytic data. And so what we have now is if we have war or a conflict that occurs where number one is, we're in great shape, because if war occurs this way, it's going to be in a physical domain, land, sea, or air. Our enemy may fight us using conventional, classical mechanic ways, and we'll be able to easily defeat them using the methods that we have now. However, look at number two. If we look at a future conflict there, perhaps an overlap of classical mechanics and the social construction of reality. When we look at the Arab Spring Rebellion of 2010 to 2012, or the Russian little green men in the Ukraine, or China building islands out of the sea in order to place military forces and declare sovereign expansion, then our military emphasis on classical mechanics here becomes weakened or vulnerable. If we consider where number three is, a future conflict that contains a high overlap of emerging quantum as well as classical mechanics of warfare, we're equally in trouble. This could be where China targets Taiwan with quantum attacks on currency, information systems, and other essential services, combined with a conventional amphibious blockade. But the area that I'm most concerned with, and I think military design really provides us opportunity, is where number four is. And that is the Venn diagram overlap of all of those. And this is where we have the least understanding and the least ability to articulate, because once again, the vast majority of how we understand warfare is still trapped in that classical frame. And we are unwilling or unable right now to consider these other two. This is where military design provides us these opportunities. But to do so means that we are challenging some very sacred things that many of our institutional defenders will prevent us from doing. So very briefly, this is an example of how one might frame, in this case, the military design movement. This is a recent article that came out in the Shiji Design Journal, where researchers attempted to map all of the existing literature on military design to frame what is in this movement and what is not. And so I just provide this right now to show one more idea, which is designing within your frame. And here, this might be a military design frame, all the things that we believe. And then anything outside of that frame becomes the exteriority, the exterior. And this is where innovation exists, but your institution does not want you to venture out there. And so going back to that strategist question, where should design fit in at the strategic, operational, or tactical level? They are asking the question of designing with a small d, little d, because they want me to obey levels of war, which exists only within a military frame, and then fit design in somewhere within those rules. And you can do this, and some design methods do try to do this quite well. Designing within our existing doctrine, our framework, our decision-making methods, centers of gravity, levels of war, lines of effort, desired end states. U.S. Army design methodology does this very specifically. But outside is designing with a big D. And that is what I think that we provide at JSAL for SOCOM, and also exists in other meta methodological design approaches, looking at challenging the frame itself. Why do we use levels of war? Are those appropriate here? Should we be considering a different way? And not just levels of war. Everything is open for discussion, investigation, disruption, destruction, and replacement with something never seen before, but is needed right now by your military to fight differently tomorrow. And this is the methodology that we use. You'll see on the left is what we show our students. And this is sequenced in a certain way. This is the method, if you will. However, we tell them that this is able to be changed. It can be shaped. It is non-referential in that if you must design differently, you can change how you do the design. But we don't tell them that initially because that's a bit overwhelming. Now, I'd like to get into two important terms very briefly, but I have a way of explaining them that will be useful for you all. And you'll want to use your chat function in Zoom to type some things. So get ready, everyone. We're going to talk very briefly about ontology and epistemology. And those are big philosophical terms, but they are essential for you to use and just know about. And here's an easy way to show them. Now, I picked this image specifically for my audience today. I think many of you are familiar and know exactly what this image is, but I want you to imagine for a minute that this image is there and there are no humans around, and aliens from another planet, from another solar system, they visit and they're looking at just this image and they can't talk to any humans, and they're trying to figure out what is real, what can we know on this image without any other input at all. And this is what's going to help us spread out what is ontology, which is what we know about the world, what is real and what is not, and epistemology, which is different. It is how we know how our knowledge works, how we know about things. It's conceptual, that it's not tangible. We can't touch epistemological things. So I'd like you to write into the text right now, what might those aliens know? If you were an alien, what would you know about this image? What is here? So go ahead and start typing in just whatever thoughts you have. I'll start with human beings kicking a sphere, kicking a round object, right? Or vegetation on the ground with green chlorophyll color, right? So things like that. So type whatever you think. And as we get some results in here, let's take a look. And what is going to happen is that you and I and everyone here, especially our French audience, we automatically know so many things about this image that ontology and epistemology get tangled up and we don't even realize it. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the image, this is a famous young French World Cup player who's the youngest goal scorer in a major tournament, and he probably got a nice pay raise with this, more money and more fame. But the things on the left in this list, these are the ontology. These are the things that only the aliens could deduce from this image. They are humans or humanoids. They're wearing different types of clothing with certain colors. One is kicking a ball. There's a field of grass, and so on and so forth. They might even get into the gravity of the planet and the molecules. Now, look on the right-hand side. Did any of you think or type any of the things in there, such as the soccer player scoring a goal? That's epistemology, because if you are talking about winning at a rule in something, that is conceptual. You'd have to teach the aliens how many points we get in football, how numbers work, how math works, how humans calculate. And humans calculate math and have calculated very differently. We'd have to talk about salary and money and bonuses and sports and entertainment. And why do humans enjoy sporting? So all those things on the right are epistemological, and everything on the left is ontology. Now, if you were mixing the two, that's a good example of how we don't even realize how our frames govern us. And this is why it's very hard, but very important for military design to break into this and confront us, because this is why we don't even challenge levels of war, centers of gravity, desired end state, ends, ways, and means, lines of effort, decisive points, decision points, and so on and so forth. All of these things are tangled in our belief system, and it's almost invisible. And so we start with social paradigm theory as our first step. And so this is where we look at how we know what our frame is. And one of the examples we use in our design education on the very first day is we have students watch a short clip from the movie Jaws, the shark movie. And you can watch this video, if you're interested, on YouTube at our Think JSOW website. The link is right there. And we explain how we do this exercise. But very briefly, we have our design students arranged in teams, and we show them a brief scene of the mayor of the town, the police chief, and the shark scientist arguing in front of a billboard. This occurs early in the movie when no one has seen the shark yet. They're not sure what's happening, and they're trying to figure out what to do for the town. And the first thing we do is we tell the students, you cannot write any words on the board. You must draw using pictures. And we want you in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we want you to draw an explanation of the scene. And no matter we do this for thousands of students over and over. And the first drawings look like this. We see dollar signs for the mayor or money. We see beakers and science equipment for the scientists. We see police badges for the sheriff. We normally see them arranged in a triangle or a geometric shape. The shark is drawn with teeth and people being eaten. And over and over and over, we get almost the same drawings, no matter where we go or who we work with. The reason for this is because we don't realize our frames until design challenges them. And to do this, we have to bring attention to it, which is why this is an important first step in design education. So then what we do is we tell the students they have to watch the video again, and they have to draw it one more time. But now you cannot use any of the things that was in your first picture. All those things are gone. And so students say, how do I draw a shark if I cannot draw a shark? This leads to deeper ontological and epistemological questions of, does the shark matter? What is really happening? Why is this happening? And immediately, with just those two steps, in less than 30 minutes, we have design teams moving completely in divergent directions instead of total convergence where they're drawing the same things. Going from convergence to divergence just by dropping tools and shaping them to think about their thinking. And this becomes the cornerstone of how we do design with the big D to challenge these frames. And so then we move into this next step, which is not really a step. And I'm cautious about saying steps with design. It's iterative, it's fluid, it's dynamic, it changes. But for beginning designers, we still have to give them steps because our traditional classical mechanical frame really wants steps, and that's okay. And so we begin to try to be aware of other frames, of other ways of looking at the same things in reality. And so here's an example of a design team that was looking at China, and they were trying to look at tensions in the system. And a tension in a system is something that cannot be targeted. It cannot be eliminated or defeated or destroyed. Tensions are systemic. They never go away. They may evolve or change, but they do so in very nonlinear and often challenging ways that we can't even imagine until they're happening. And some tensions are things such as poverty or drugs. And so when you say there's a war on drugs or a war on terror, we're declaring war on a tension. It's something we can never defeat or even capture because most of these things are in part epistemological. They're socially constructed. And so what this team did here with China, if you look in the lower left, these are examples of some of the tensions they came up with in the system. Authoritarian versus libertarianism for the United States and China, fundamentalism versus globalism, isolation and engagement, conflict and cooperation. And that's just what that team came up with. But these tensions are what lead the designers to consider the next part of this JSAL process, where we look at multiple futures and look at complexity of the system. And so this is what we have here. So very briefly, I will show you. I need to escape out of screen share for 1 second. And I'm going to take you into concept board. So hopefully everyone can see this on the screen. And so this is concept board. This is how we teach design distance over the past year because of COVID. This is a very nice way of using Zoom and a simulated whiteboard to have designers all over the world coming up with these concepts. In multiple futures, we're not looking at a single desired end state or a future single strategic goal because complex systems do not work this way. And so with design, you want to look at a range of divergent futures. And so this example here, we use something in our basic course that is the semiotic square. So A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. And how this works here is we start with A and we ask the students, can you put over here on the board these post-it notes what the desired future is if everything went perfectly in a conflict in 2030, in this case against China. And I'm sorry, in this case, this is environmental concerns with a European ally, and they were looking at Russia. So this is a different challenge. But the students here will put that future here, and future A tends to be that future that appears in our national strategic strategies, our policies, our politicians. This is that desired future that we always like to work strategy around. The problem is that in traditional legacy planning, this is the only one we work on. So with design, we want to say, okay, with A being that one established, we then say, give us the exact opposite future now. That's corner B. And so here the students have to come up with something totally different, where in this case, global warming and climate change in the Arctic creates extraordinarily different security challenges for Northern European nations. And what does that mean? And what does that mean with relation to Russia? And so this future is very, very different, but that's important because we want to consider different futures for whether or not design will work and what those opportunities are. Now, Very briefly, corner C is a hybrid of future A and future B. And so here designers will combine those two together and come up with these hybrid futures that are slightly different than that traditional corner A, the one that most of us spend a lot of our time on strategically. And here's the last piece. Corner D is the one that causes the greatest amount of challenge. And this is where the greatest opportunity for innovation always exists. Corner D is that future which has neither A nor B. Anything that they put in the futures of A and B cannot be in this future. And so students struggle here, but this is where designers spend most of their time, because this is a very, very different type of future that we normally don't think about. And so this is just a very quick example of how we can generate multiple futures within which designers can then consider, what can we change? Why would it matter? What are these new opportunities, as well as the design risks and consequences for the organization? Now back to my presentation briefly to finish. This moves us into the last part of design, where we're iteratively working with our designers to create new constructs, challenge the organization, but also show, here are the multiple futures that are emerging. Here is why the organization needs to change. And these are the opportunities that we have, as well as risks, because design is highly experimental. It's dangerous, but it's the only way that you can truly have strategic innovation and have a new advantage that your adversary is entirely unprepared for, that they do not expect. And then there are design consequences. And a consequence is different than a risk or an opportunity, because if you are changing the system so that your future conflict provides something totally different, you are also creating new challenges and new problems that don't exist today, but in the new system, they will be there as well. So when we create atomic weapons, we have created the ultimate weapon that strategically might prevent or defeat an enemy at an extreme level. But that now creates the nuclear age. And look at all the problems we have with weapons of mass destruction and mutually assured destruction. Those are challenges and they are consequences that did not exist in the pre-nuclear age. So with design comes these consequences, and we have to consider those as well in our strategic design. Now, I have just a few minutes left, but I'd like to show you a few things. First, if you're looking for examples of case studies of design teams at operational, strategic, or tactical level, and once again, if those layers work in your construct, if you're inside of your frame, there are examples that are out there, and this is one of the newest ones. This is available open source. You can go to the link here, and there's no paywall. It's an English article by the 75th Ranger Regiment, American Commandos, and how they built a design team in their organization, the relationship with the staff, with the commander, with the units, how that design team operated, what they worked on, how they educated the design team, and how they linked it into the planning. And so all this is available here. It's a very useful article, and there are also others. I'd like to just leave with this, but I have a few more slides that since I have a few minutes left. This is really what we're trying to do with design. We're trying to stop ourselves from being held by things that are just conceptual barriers. And there are so many of them in our military way of thinking, of doing strategy, and we believe them because we've been told that they are real. But sometimes they're not, or the world has changed and those things no longer should hold us back. And so this is just a quick example of recent design work I've done with some European allies. And this shows what happens in person, where there's whiteboards, there's drawings, there's concepts and pictures. This is a design team that worked online with us over 6 weeks. And this was them looking at China over each of the weeks with the metaphors and the ideas and the drawings that they came up with to challenge. This is an example of design in class, in studio, where we have them use different objects, because breaking out of using our words is a very important way of being able to realize your frame and question it and create something new that does not exist in your doctrine or in your methodology today. These are places that are doing design right now. Units, schools, organizations. These are all military or defense related. They're all over the world, and they're all doing design slightly differently. This is a very new field, and this is just a partial list, the ones that I know about. There is a military design masterclass that is available online. It is in English. It is 2 hours long. It will provide you a baseline of all of the concepts that you need as a senior leader or on staff on what military design is, different types of design, how design relates to planning, as well as different design exercises that you can use. You can do this in a class. You can do this online. You can do this with your family or friends because there are certain exercises in drawing, and it's a lot of fun. I know Pierre-Marie and others have seen this. We have put this online so that we can saturate what design is and how JSAL provides it as far as we can around the world. And this is a nice example that's very new. It's available at Think JSAL. There's also the military design community. This is not related to JSAL, but we have many of our members involved. And Philippe Belliot-Brassard can talk more about the IMDC. We just had our last one in Budapest, but we've also done it in Toronto, Ottawa, and Lancaster, United Kingdom in the past. And there's also the Special Operations Hive Minds. This is part of the Archipelago of Design. And this is an online, decentralized, totally voluntary group of military special operations professionals. I think that more hives will occur in the future, and I hope that there will be a French one. There's lots of self-education available. I will promote Think JSAL because that's what I've built with a lot of my material. There are lessons, podcasts, interviews, lectures, and facilitation modules available for all of you. Feel free to check them out if you want. And then lastly, there is a English speaking Defense Design Guild on Facebook. If you're interested in meeting other designers and asking questions and sharing things, this is a great source. And that's all I've got. And I'm done on time with a minute to spare.